In today's video, I'm going to be doing a full mockup build from a mockup here, and I'm going to be building it out for you in Squarespace. I work with Dina at Simple and Soulful Creative, so that's her Squarespace web design agency, and I kind of white label for her. So she creates the designs and then hands them off to me to build out in Squarespace. So this video will give you some insight into how a designer and a developer or a builder can work together to deliver designs for clients. So this is the design that we're going to be working with. I have glanced at it briefly, but everything in this video is pretty much going to be real time. There's going to be minimal editing unless I need to speed up through boring parts. So bear with me, but I think you're going to get a lot of really good learnings out of this. So I really like how she sets up the mockups. Generally, I prefer Figma, but she has a workflow down in Illustrator. So, we have a system worked out. And she provides the colors that she uses for the color palette, which is really helpful. She provides the fonts that she has used that correspond to the headers, the text, and the buttons, so I can set those up in Squarespace. And then she gives me little notes in the margins, which is really helpful. And so then here she's indicated what's going to be dropdowns. So I believe these are going to be under Connect. So if you're a designer working with a developer, this is a nice way to kind of set things up. You're making it much easier on the developer because, they know how they're supposed to be setting things up inside of Squarespace. So as we scroll down the page, we're going to have a big hero section. She is having this idea where instead of having the logo in the header, it's going to be in the main hero section. That's going to be fine. We'll use a little bit of CSS in the home page's header code injection to hide the logo, and we'll just upload it as an image in this section. So that's not a problem at all. This will be its own section. We'll have another section here. This will be its own section here. And then she has this cool idea where each of these, like you'll hover over this block here, and then this text and button is going to appear. And that's going to be easy enough. We'll go over the CSS for that. I'm going to do this in an auto layout section because hover effects like this are really difficult if you're trying to do it with blocks in a section. But with the auto layout, the way that the auto layout sections are structured, this type of an effect is super easy. It's not easy, but it's straightforward, I should say. Then we have the footer section here. And then we have a full width Instagram block with Fluid Engine. It's really easy to drag blocks the full width of the section. And then we have just a little footer section down here. So this is a simple build, which is why I thought this would be a good one just to record from start to finish so you could see my process and how I go about tackling things. So in terms of kind of getting ready, the thing that I like to start with is saving all of the images. So I'm going to go ahead and start with that. And then I'm going to jump into Squarespace and set up my color palette and my fonts. So I'm just going to go ahead and first save all these images. Now, some of these images have overlays, and I don't want to save the image with the overlay. So I will have to come in here to the layers panel and locate some of these layers. Like this is a group and the overlay is over the image, and I only want the image. So I'm going to make sure that I hide the overlay and then come in here to the image. And the way that I save them is I just export the selection, and that'll bring up this dialog here. And then I create a folder for the website. So I have a Haven folder here, and I'll select the folder, and then I'll just give it like a descriptive name and then export the asset, and I save them as JPEGs. I'll do JPEG 100. And what I like to do, it sort of depends on the canvas size. So banner images should be no wider than 2,500 pixels. So I'm gonna save it at 1, and then we'll see what canvas size she used. So let me export this first asset. And now if I right click and go to properties, we can go to details, and this is 2,500 pixels. Cool. So I don't want to scale it up any more than that. And at JPEG 100, it's 3 megabytes, which is really big. So I definitely will not want it to be that image heavy. So let me go back and right click and export selection. And instead of JPEG 100, let's go JPEG 80. And let's save this as the second version. So we just kind of want to dial in our settings here as we go through. And there we go. So that really saved a bunch. So it's still 2,500 pixels, but it's only 1.78 megabytes now. compared to like what it was before. And then if we go to the image quality, it's this versus that, and like it's indistinguishable to the human eye. And Squarespace is going to throw some compression on this too to make the file size even smaller. So I just want to sort of get it down to like a reasonable size. So let's export the selection and let's go down to 50. And then I'll call this _3 and export that asset. And then we can determine if this will be even better. So the details, it's 2,500 pixels and it's only 685 kilobytes. To me, I think this is going to be a little bit too compressed. It's still okay to my human eye, but Squarespace is also going to be compressing the image on top of this compression that Illustrator is doing. And in some cases, if an image is compressed before upload, Squarespace is going to read that compression as detail and like further compress it. So the file size can actually get bigger than what you uploaded. So I'd rather have them compress my 1.78 megabyte image than accidentally make my 685 kilobyte image even more compressed, if that makes sense, and increase the file size. So I'm gonna go with 80, JPEG 80 as my image saving format. So now that I have my hero image, let me go ahead and rename this. I can very easily go through and just save the rest of these images. So I'll export the selection. It'll be one time, and we want this to be JPEG 80. This will be horse eating grass. And I'll export that asset. Cool. And then let me go to the properties and just sort of see how big this image is. 1078 by 1384. I think that feels pretty good for the size that this is going to be on the canvas. So yeah, so I'm going to just go through and save out all of the rest of the images. In this case, I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger because the image is pretty small on the canvas, and I wanna make sure that the image isn't saved too small. So I've bumped up the scale to 1.1. As I continue the fast forward, you might see me do that on occasional images, but just know I'm just sort of getting a feeling of how big it is on the canvas and if maybe I wanna save it as slightly of a bigger image size. So I'm going to save this logo as an image as well, and then I'm also going to save this arrow icon as an image. So now I'm just coming back in here and cleaning up these file names a little bit. Okay, so now we are ready to go. I can now jump into Squarespace and start setting up the site. So inside of Squarespace, I always start every site from a style guide, and I have a video on that if you want to check out my process of just sort of why I start from a style guide. But for me, it makes things so much easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is start with the colors. So I'm going to jump over to the colors panel and I'm going to edit the palette, and I'm going to change my palette to reflect the colors that are in this design. And she has organized them from lightest to darkest, so that's really nice. I'm going to just follow that for my build here in the palette. So we're going to start from lightest to darkest, and I'm going to flip all of these to hex and make sure that I include a pound or hashtag symbol. And there we go. There's all of our colors. So with the palette set up, the next thing that I want to do is tackle the fonts. So I'm going to first start with the headings, and she has told me what the headings are. So I'm going to look for Source Serif Pro Light. So we'll come into the font family, we'll browse all fonts, and I'm going to go Source serif pro. And we are going to, okay. So this is always interesting. Sometimes she chooses fonts that are not available through Squarespace. And it looks like in this case, 400 is the lightest font. And you can see it just feels much bolder. So sometimes I have to take some just creative liberties. Source serif. Let's see. So all these source serifs look very similar to Pro, but you can see display gives us the ability to have a much lighter font weight. So I'm thinking maybe 300 looks pretty similar to our headers that are Source Serif Pro Light. So here are what our headers look like. And in Squarespace, this is what our headers look like. Maybe 400 is actually okay with this font weight because it is a little bit lighter. So we're going to stick with this and just run that by Dina, and hopefully that's an okay solution. Next, we have the paragraphs, and those are going to be Botanica Mono Web. So we'll look for those. Oh, there we go. Botanica Mono Web already set up for our paragraphs. That's great. And next we have the buttons, which are also Botanica Mono Web. So let me go to the buttons and just make sure that that's also set up, which it's not. So we're going to go Botanica Mono Web 400. Change the font for that one, and then also change the font for our secondary and tertiary buttons. There we go. So all the button fonts are correct. And for miscellaneous, I'm also going to put it to Botanica Mono Web. Great. So those are all set up. I'm going to go into Assign Styles and make sure that one interesting thing when you're setting up a site is there are some like custom settings. So if we go to our like global font styles, so if I go to like headings and then I search the font family, you can see like Rock Grotesque is in here. Even though I've already assigned our headings, paragraphs, and buttons to only these two fonts, we still have this lingering font here. And that's because if you go to Assign Styles, it'll be assigned as a custom font for some of these things. So the header button for some reason is always set to custom. So we probably want to set it to paragraph. And that way it's going to inherit the this paragraph font. So it's not Rock. And then if we come through here, we just want to make sure there's no more custom settings. And it doesn't look like there are, because we don't want to be loading other fonts unnecessarily. So now if I go back to the font family search, you can see there's no more of that, lingering font. And that takes care of the issue. Perfect. So now we only have two fonts being loaded to our site, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so now I can see in my style guide how my buttons look, how my headings are looking. So everything is looking good so far, and I can see all the different color themes as well. So I know I'm definitely going to have to change many of these things. The dark 2 color theme, for example, is not looking at all how I want it to. I want it to be white, and right now it's using gray. So I want it to be this color, which is like our lightest color here, the FCFBF8. So let's go ahead and change up our color themes. So I'm going to head back to Site Styles, and I'm going to head to Colors, and we're going to go to Dark 1. And we need to change the buttons for Dark 1. So I'm going to go down to our text links. We want them to be that color. Pretty much anything that is not looking correct, I'm going to change. So primary button background needs to change. Make sure these are our palette colors. And the nice thing about the style guide is we have everything very visible here as I'm making these changes. So I know that, you know, things are looking how I want them to. We're gonna head to dark 2, and like a bunch of things in here need to be changed. So everything that's gray needs to go to our lightest color. It'd be really nice if we could select multiple things at once and make bulk changes, but unfortunately we can't, so it is what it is. Next, I'm going to go to darkest 1 and clean up that. And do the same for darkest 2. Okay, so now as I scroll through the style guide, things are looking a lot better. I do need to clean up the bright 1 color theme, because I think those should not be gray. They should be our lightest color. Yeah. Okay, all right. So that is looking good. So our gray sections, we want buttons that are black. Those are gonna be white. And then for this section, it's also white. Okay, so I think things are actually set up well. So I know I'm gonna have a gray section, and I want to use a shape block in this gray section. And so one of the gray sections is gonna need to have a white button and white text. Because, so one gray section is gonna need to have black text, but one section is going to have white text because we're gonna put a tan block behind it. And I can use the text override to change the text color white in this section, but there's no override to change the button color. So one thing that I could do is I could set up the primary button and the secondary button to have the exact same styles, but to be different colors. And actually, I feel like that might make more sense than setting up a section that would have virtually invisible text in it when it doesn't have a shape block behind it. So like this is what setting up the section styles would look like. And I don't think that's a good call, just because this one section design has a shape block behind it. So what I'm gonna do instead is I want to make sure that one of my gray sections has a secondary button color of white. So I'm gonna go ahead and set that up now. So for my gray sections, so basically that's gonna be light 1 or light 2. So I'll go ahead and set it up for light 1. I guess it doesn't matter. We'll do light 1. So the secondary button background is going to be white, and the secondary button text is going to be black. There we go. Okay. So now you can see the secondary button is the opposite. And so now we want our buttons to be outlined. So this will be a good time to go to the buttons panel. And for the primary button, what I'm going to set up the primary button styles, and then I'm going to make all the buttons inherit the primary button style. So what I'm going to do is go to the shape, and we don't want to fill. We just want the outline. And for the outline, I'm going to make it 1 pixel. And I'll kind of get the sizing of the button correct. So right now our buttons are a little bit too tall, so I'm going to take down the vertical padding. And the buttons should be uppercase. So I'm going to come in here for the text transform and go to uppercase. And we'll get a better sense of like how the button should be styled. And I think that's actually pretty close. So now I'm going to apply to all button styles. And so now we have this white button here. And so that'll show up properly on the shape block. So that should work out just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save and exit. And now that for the most part, our paragraphs or our font styles, I should say, and our color themes are all set up. So now that that kind of legwork is out of the way, it's so much easier now to come in and build out our site. So I'm going to start with the home page. Of course, we're gonna need to do some finessing to the font sizes and spacing and things like that. But now I'm going to come into the site and just start blocking things out. So first we have this big hero section. So one thing I'm going to do is just like Control Z all the way back to the beginning before I changed everything. That way I can see like how dark the overlays should be since I've gone in and hidden everything. Okay, so now we're kind of back to where we were at the beginning. So I'm going to start with the hero section. So I'll do a new blank section. I'll upload the background banner image. And then we want this one to have a pretty dark overlay. So once it uploads, I'm going to increase the overlay opacity and go to the colors and choose one of the dark themes. Okay, so I'm going to come in here and add an image block because we're going to have a pretty big logo image in here. And I'll copy this text. Now, one thing that I do when I come in here is if we were using something like Figma, it would just tell me like if it was an H1, H2, you know, what paragraph size it was. I don't have that luxury in Illustrator. So one thing I do is just compare the font sizes. So I can see that this is obviously a header just based on the font that it's using because it's different than the body font. So it's some sort of header, but I just need to kind of compare the different sizes. So this one is smaller than this one. So I'm guessing this is like an H. So this is 74 and this is 77. So I think they're like virtually supposed to be the same size. And then these are also 77 and this one's 74. So I guess we can actually make those two different heading sizes. So 74 can be an H3 and 77 can be an H2. I think that should work just fine. Okay, so we are going to make our 52. This is going to be an H4. So next, I'm going to come in here, add in my text block. And we'll make this an H4. And then down below, so I'll just duplicate this and drag it down. And this text is 26, and this text is 36. 36, 36. So our body text is going to be 36, and our H3 text, so our P3 text, excuse me, is going to be smaller. So that means if this is 36, okay, so this is our body font, and this is our paragraph 3. So I'm going to make this centered and paragraph 3. And then I'm going to bring in the down arrow image. And make that super small. Okay, so our image is a little bit big. And our overlay needs to be a little bit darker. And I'm going to change the height to small. That a little bit higher. I'm just trying to get everything on the screen at the same time. Like so. Okay, cool. So I think that's a very good start. I might drag that in just a little bit. And again, we can kind of play with the spacing, but we're just sort of getting everything blocked in here, and we can go through kind of the final changes. Now, one thing I'm not sure about is, like, this is clearly, the aspect ratio is like a square, and for a hero landing section, you know, only like this much of the screen is actually visible. So I'm not exactly sure what should be above the fold. And by above the fold, I mean, like, imagine the computer monitor is here. So like all this stuff would be cut off. So it's like, you know, where, when Dina was designing this, my question is just, where did she think the bottom of the monitor screen would be? If that makes sense as a question. So like, did she think that the monitor screen was going to cover everything in one view, or maybe only the logo, and this stuff would be below the fold, as they say? So that's just what I'm not sort of sure about. So here I've put everything above the fold, but you can see it looks much more squishy than in her design, where everything has much more breathing room, but obviously wouldn't fit all on one screen. So that's sort of a thing where there's going to be some feedback from Dina. She'll let me know kind of how she envisioned that first section, but I'm just doing my best to sort of block things out in the meantime. So next we have this section here. So I'm just going to copy all this heading text, and we had sort of figured out that this was going to be an H3. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new section, add a blank section. This is going to be my light 1. I'm going to add my text here. These are going to be H3s. And then this is going to be my paragraph font. And then I need a button. Okay, and then next I'm going to drop in a shape block. I'll set the section height to small. We'll drag the shape block to be full width. Kind of make this a little bit bigger, and then we'll come in here and change the color and move this all the way back. Now, like I mentioned before, our button should be white, so I'm going to change this to our secondary button, and I want it to be fit because fit buttons are much more responsive than fill buttons. And then I'll select everything, and we'll use the color override to make that content white. Now, already I can tell that our site width is way too wide. Like, look how wide this content is going, and we need some sort of inset here on all of the content. So that just means I need to adjust my site spacing. So before we get too far into the build, I want to make sure that I do this step. It's now under accessories, which apparently this tab is going to be changing names. But as of right now, it's under accessories and spacing. In the future, if you need to get to the site spacing tab, you can just, you know, click anywhere in the like side panel area and then hit / and then just search for site spacing. Let's see. Oh, it would just be spacing. And then you can directly bring up the spacing panel. So I like to set all my sites at 1440 and 6 viewport width units. So that way the content can't get quite so wide. And then I'll go ahead and hit save. Okay, so that should be good. I'm gonna just peek at my Illustrator file here. So this shape block should be going all the way to the middle. And then our image is gonna have like probably a column in between, and then the image is gonna span the rest of the section. So I'm gonna add my block, add my image block, upload that horse eating grass image. And then I'm going to double click the image, go to design, and make sure it's filling the frame. And then I'll drag it all the way over, except for maybe like, I'll leave 2 columns. And then we want to make sure that our content here is kind of centered in the image. So if I go back, Okay, let's see. So there's probably a couple rows on top and a couple rows on bottom. It looks like that's about it for the padding. So we'll do maybe like 2 rows on top, 2 rows on the bottom, and I'm just counting the rows there. And then 2 rows in between. And that should be good. Now obviously we have like a lot more space here for our text. So I'm gonna be making these headings much bigger because they're too small right now as it stands. And for this design, I'm actually, normally I do 1440. I think that's actually even a little bit too wide. Like in her design, it feels pretty constrained. So I'm gonna go even less than that. Yeah, maybe I'm gonna do, let's see, let's play around with some sizes a little bit. There's no perfect setting. For most sites, I think 1440 is a really good size, but this one just feels a little bit too wide. So let's go down to maybe like 1350. Yeah, maybe that is a little bit better. And that way we have more space over here on the side on really wide screen sizes. And maybe I'm gonna do 1400. I'm gonna make it go a little bit wider. This is me being really, I don't know, really finicky or picky about it. But I'm just gonna stick with 1400. Okay, and then our H3s are much too small, so I'm gonna go to the site styles and I'm gonna go to headings. And my H3 needs to get much bigger. That looks pretty good. We'll go 2.8. I'll just bring it in just a tiny bit. That way we're not getting those single word orphans. There's at least 2 words now as it wraps. Cool, so that looks good. So that's the second section. Next, let's go ahead and build out this banner section here. I'll add a new section to the page, a new blank section. And I'm going to upload the banner image. So I'm going to go to background, upload image, upload this grass background. And I want to crank up the overlay opacity on this one as well. And we're also going to go to a dark color. Now, I can actually see, let's see what the opacity is of the overlay. If I go to layers, oh wait, here we go, 62%. And it's true black. Okay, so for these color overlays, I need to go back to site styles because right now these overlays are pulling from the darkest color in our color theme, in our color palette, which is not black. So let me go to colors. I need to go to darkest one. And for the section, for the background overlay, instead of having it be this color, I need to go to custom and I need to make it 100% black. And I need to do that for, oh, this is using darkest one as well. So that's good. For all of my dark color themes, I'm going to do that. Background overlay, good, that's set to black. And for darkest 2, and the background overlay should be black. Okay, so now that our overlay is truly black, we can dial in the opacity. So it should be set to 62. So I'm going to come in here and do 62. And now it's exact. I'm going to do the same thing for the home banner too. So let's see what this is set to. This opacity is 66. So I'll come up here, background. And it was pretty close. It was at 71, but we can dial it in exactly. There we go. Okay, so now this is going to be my H2. Copy that text. make it an H2 and center it. And now there's like the question of, do I make this a single text block or multiple text blocks? And basically it just depends on if the heading and the paragraph are different sizes. So in this case, because the paragraph is wider than the heading, then I have no problem putting them in the same text block. It would only be if the paragraph needed to be shorter than the heading that I would then need to put them in separate text blocks. So hopefully, that logic makes sense to you. There we go, that looks good. And now we just need to add in a button block. I always set them to fit. And this button is going to say, make a donation. And I always, if I can, if this button is on a single line, then I just make it span the full width. And that way on narrow screen sizes, it's never going to wrap or anything funky. It'll have, the full width of the section to reside in. There we go. That was a very easy section. Next, we can do this kind of like bio section. Let's go ahead and add a new section, add a blank section, make it light 1. We need an image block in here. And then we also need text block. So this welcome is 28. So this is going to be a P3. And this is going to be a P2. And this is going to be an H3. So we have welcome in P3. Then we have an H3. Then we have all of this text here as a paragraph 2. And then I have a learn more button here. Fit, left align, learn more. And always, always, always extend the button as far as it can go. Now for the image size, it looks like it's just sort of hugging the left here. And I'm going to set it to fill. And maybe we'll make this like this. Now, one thing I like to do when I need to sort of get a button and text to align correctly, so I always just get rid of the vertical gap and then put one row in between, and then I'll align this to the top, and that way it's just super consistent. There's always just one row gap in between. So that method works for me. I like it. And there we go. So that section is now built out. And now we get to kind of the more complex and fun section. So again, I'm going to build this out as an auto layout, and we'll use a little bit of CSS to kind of get this thing operating with the hover layout. So I'm going to copy this first paragraph text. So this first one is going to be give. So I'm going to go to people, and I'll just choose this section here. I'm going to go to edit content, and I'm just going to get the content in first. So the title is going to be give. Here we have our paragraph text to sort of clean up any unnecessary formatting. And then I'll go back, and we need to upload that image. So it's the horse image. Perfect. And I'll go back and add image alt text later. But for the sake of the video, I'll keep things moving. Next we have stay. title will be stay, and I'll copy this text. Then finally we have connect. What a cute photo. That's pretty funny. Okay, and then we have our content in there. So for each of these, we're going to want to add a button. So we'll go to elements and add our buttons in. And then in each of them, we want it to be learn more. Oh wait, is that right? Make a donation, learn more, and connect with us. Okay. So this is going to be make a donation, learn more, and connect with us. Oh, connect with us. Okay, so we sort of have these set up. So I'm going to go to design, and we're just going to do our best to get these just, you know, as good of a head start before we start writing our CSS as possible. So I definitely want these to be centered. I do want 3, but I want my headings to be much bigger. So I'm going to do item title. So this is going to be our sort of initial size here. And this is 77. So this is the same size as our H2. So I'm just going to want to keep that in mind. So if we go to, let me save and exit. And if I go to my headings, so my H3 is 2.8, which means my H2 is going to be like 2.9. So I'm going to make my size of those headings 2.9. So I'll edit the content, I'll go to style, and this is going to be 2.9. Oh, super close. And then this can be probably 1. And the item button can be 1. Whoops. 1 rep. This is going to be 2.9. Okay, so we got the sizes dialed in. Are these buttons a little bit smaller? So the size of these are 36 and the size of these are 28. So actually our button text in general is a little bit smaller than our paragraph text. So that is good to know. I'm going to reflect that change in here as well. So if we go to site styles and we go to headings, we go to paragraphs. So our paragraph 2 is 1.2 rem. And our base size is 16. So let me bump this up to 18. I always like my paragraph to be based on a size of 1 rem. I think it's confusing to me when my paragraphs are not 1 rem. Like 1 should refer to this base size here. So my paragraphs I want to be 18 pixels. So that means my headings I want to be a little bit smaller. So let's go like 2.8, 2.7. And maybe this will be like 1.9. And then this is way too big. Let's go like 3.3. That might be a little bit big for the headings actually. Let me go 2.5, 2.6. And compare that. Okay, feels pretty good. And then that means these need to go down to 2.6. Cool. 1 rem, and then the item button is going to be 0.9 rem. And in general, all buttons are going to be 0.9 rem. I'm going to apply, oh, I guess I can't, okay. 0.9 rem. And tertiary will also be 0.9 rem. All right, a little bit of fiddling there, but we are now back to where we should be. I'm going to edit this section. I don't think my change for the button took because I need to do 0.9. There we go. Okay, so let's go back in to edit this content. Now I think I have all my font sizes dialed in. So I want to go to size and space, and I want this to go full. I want the space between items to be 0. And the space between columns is also, or space between rows is also going to be 0 when they stack. And space between elements, let's go medium. But the space between the image and text should be 0. That looks fine. And the vertical padding for the section, we actually want that to be 0 because we want it to be full width and full height. So there's no gap above and below the section. So I'm going to click these 3 dots and we're going to drag those all the way down. So I'll just need to use a little bit of CSS to get rid of the padding on the sides and then to place the content over the images. And I want them to be all the same height, so that way all the buttons align. All right, so now that we have that set up, we're in pretty good shape. I just need to go ahead and add my CSS for the hover effects. So what I need to do is go to the custom CSS window. So we'll go to Pages, Website Tools, Custom CSS, and let me go ahead and make the window a little bit bigger here. And it should be much easier for you guys to see as I'm writing it. This is an extension that I developed just for myself for recording these videos, so it's not something that you'll be able to find or use, but again, it should help for this recording. So this is going to be the home page hover section styling. And I'm going to directly just grab the data section ID for this section using that handy block identifier plugin. And so now what I can do is right click on the section, and any CSS that we write for this section is only going to apply to this one section. So I'm going to grab the user items list simple because this is the element that has the padding on the sides. You can see as I hover over it, we have the green. So I'm going to go ahead and target this element inside of these curly brackets. I'll open up some more curly brackets and we're going to say padding left 0 and padding right 0. And one way to increase my specificity is to add the site wrapper ID. All page contents in Squarespace, so all the sections, your header, your footer, all of the page contents are wrapped in an element that has an ID of site wrapper. So it's directly inside the body. So here we have the main body, and then we have this element called site wrapper, and it has an ID of site wrapper. So because all of our elements on the site lie inside this container, an easy way to increase our specificity so that our CSS will override Squarespace's, because IDs are the most specific type of selector, is to add hashtag site wrapper and then a space. So we're saying inside of this element, we're going to look for this section. Inside of this section, we're going to look for this element, and we're going to make the padding on the left and the right 0. So now this section is spanning the full width, which is great. Oh, it looks like it can't go full screen when my plugin is enabled, so that's good to know. So the next thing that we need to do is go ahead and put this content over the image. So it's interesting because we have the title initially, and then as we hover over the image, we want the title to, I guess, sort of fade out, and we want this content to fade in. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and just place everything over the image, and then we need to align our title to the bottom. And then after that, we'll sort of handle the hover effect. So we need to position this content over the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to inspect the section. And so here we have each list item. And inside of the list item, we have list item media. And then we have list item content. Now, currently, the list item media has an aspect ratio. And so the height of the image is determined by the aspect ratio. So in this case, it's 3:4. I don't really want that. I want the height of the section to be determined by the height of the content. By the height of the content. Otherwise, what if the content is taller than the image? It's going to get cut off. So the content should be the thing that dictates the height of this section. So one thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to target the list item media inner. And we're going to have to get rid of the padding. And we're also going to have to make the list item media basically have a position of absolute. So let's start there. Let's target the list item media class. And then I'm going to give it a position of absolute. And I'm going to give it an inset of 0. And right now, so all of the images are being positioned relative to their nearest parent that has a position defined. We want them to be relative to each list item, but there's no position defined. So I'm going to have to come in here to the list item and give it a position of relative. And so now each image is going to, it's only going to take up, its item because it's being positioned relative to the nearest list item. So now each image is spanning its own list item, which is exactly what we want. But as I said before, it's going to be as tall as the list item media inner because it has the defined aspect ratio with the padding bottom. So I'm going to come in here to the list item media inner, and I'm going to go padding bottom 0, and I'm going to throw an important tag on there just to make sure that applies. But now our list item media inner, it doesn't have a height because its height was set to 0, so that the height could be defined by the padding bottom aspect ratio. So we need to give it a height of 100%. So we're going to go height 100%. I'm going to throw an important tag on that as well. And now we get our image back. Cool. So now each image is just the height of its container, the height of its text, which is what we want. So now we can start sort of playing around with the positioning and stacking of things, because right now our image is on top of our list item content, which we do not want. So let's target our list item content. We haven't done that yet. So I'm going to drop down below and target our list item content. And now we're going to give it a Z index of, we'll do 3. And that brings it on top of the image. So cool. Whoop, I forgot I can't make it full screen when I have this bigger CSS window. I'll turn that off in a second so we can look at it. But if we look at the mockup, so we have some padding here around the content. So we definitely want to add that in on our design. So in the list item content, let's go ahead and add padding. And we want this to be responsive based on the size of the screen. So let's go ahead and do 3 viewport width units of padding. And actually, we might even need different padding on the top and the sides. So on the top and bottom, let's do 5 viewport width units. And on the sides, we'll do 3 viewport width units. And there you go, we get a little bit of padding, which is nice. Okay, so one thing that we can do, let's go ahead and target all of this content, and we need to add an image overlay so we can actually see this content, and we need to turn it white. So let's start by turning everything white. So if we jump in here to the text wrapper, so there's 2 different wrappers in the content class. There's the text wrapper and the button wrapper. So we're gonna have to handle them individually. So we have the title, which gets a class of list item content title. So we'll do that. And then we're gonna do color, #FFF. And I wonder if it's actually truly white or if it's our palette color. Okay, yeah, so it's our palette color. So I'll copy that and we'll do #our palette color. And now if I right click on the text itself, so it's going to be list item content description P. So we'll do a comma since we want to change both of these things to white. So we want to change the, I guess that works if we change the description. And then we need to target the button. So we want the button text. So this is the list item content button. And I'm going to do this separately since it's going to need different styling than everything else. So for the content, list item content _ button, we do want the color to be white, and we also want the border color to be white as well, or our palette white. And then on hover, so we're going to take this and we're going to say on hover, we want the background color to be white, and then we want our color to be our palette black color, which I can grab from our button up here. So it's going to be black. Oh, that's interesting. Is our palette color black? I don't think so. I think that's incorrect. So for light 1, I'm gonna make sure that all of these buttons are the palette color. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now that the button color is correct, I'm going to inspect the button and we can grab that palette color again. Now that the color is actually correct. And if you hold shift and click on a color, it'll show the hex code, which is cool. So now I can copy the hex code and then find my color here. So on hover, we want the color to be this and the background color to be that. Sorry, just the border color. And actually, maybe we want the border color to be this. So I probably don't want to change it. Yeah, there we go. That looks good. All right, so now we can add an overlay to the image, and I can do that using an after or before pseudo element. So let's go ahead to the list item media. I'm going to come down here and I'll just use a before pseudo element. So pseudo elements are awesome. They're a way to kind of like inject content into the HTML, but through the CSS. So they're super powerful. And so what I can do is I can make the background black. and it's positioned absolute. It's got an inset. So let me do a Z index. It's got to be higher than the image. So for the media, let's give it a Z index of 1, but we'll give the overlay a Z index of 2, which is lower than the Z index of the content, which has 3. So we've sort of like stacked these vertically. So this is the farthest away, the next farthest away, and then our content is the closest to us. And now we can just add an opacity here. So we'll do an opacity of like 0.6. And now we get our overlays back. And I can just see what the actual overlay opacity is. If I select this rectangle, so it's going to be 0.8 actually. Okay, awesome. So that looks good. But the before, let's see, what is this opacity? 63. So basically when it's hovered, it should get darker, which is good to know. So this is actually going to be 0.63. And then when it's hovered, it's going to get darker. So now we can do our hover styles. So let me come down to the bottom. And now I'm going to say when the list item is hovered over, we now want to target content inside of it. And we're going to be doing multiple things. So I'm going to bring a new sort of inside here. I'm going to pull this CSS inside of our hover curly brackets. And one thing that we want to do is change the opacity of this to 0.8. So when the list item is hovered, we're targeting the list item media before pseudo element and changing the opacity to 0.8. So that's great, but it just sort of jumps. There's no smooth transition. So we need to find our before pseudo element, and let's add a transition for the opacity. Let's do 0.3 seconds, and we'll do an kind of a fading of ease. There we go. So now it's much smoother. Perfect. So now what we can do is go to the list item content. So I'll copy this, and inside of our hover media query, so below this, we can target our list item content. And normally we want our list item content to be opacity 0. And then when this list item is hovered over, we want the opacity to be 1. So I'm going to copy this opacity here. And by default, the opacity should be 0. And let's copy the transition that we just wrote. So when we hover over the list item content, now it's fading in. But I just realized, so we can't do the whole content because we want the title to be visible initially. So actually, instead of doing it to the list item content, we want to do it to the list item description and the list item content button. And we're going to make those have opacity 0. And then when the list item is hovered, so list item hover, we're going to fade in that content, and then we want to fade out the list item title. So let me go back here. So the list item content title by default is going to have opacity 1. But when the list item is hovered, oops, don't need the extra period, we're going to do opacity 0. So now only the title is visible, and when we hover over it, the title disappears, and we just need to add our transition to our title. So here we have the description and the button with a transition, and here we're targeting the title and the list item content description. So I could come down here and add the transition like this. and now it's going to fade out how we want it to. But instead of adding this extra line here, because our description is already getting this transition, and here we want to add the transition to the title. If I add it again to the title and the description, I can save just one line of CSS by not having to redeclare it on the title. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and it's the same thing. Okay, great. So now all we have to do is just sort of like manually position our headings where we want them to go. So I'm going to sort of manually position it towards the bottom of the item. So it's sort of in the bottom like 30%. So what I'm going to do is we're going to target the title. Actually, I'm going to need to, let's see how best to do this. I think it's probably, so all of these things are the same size, but I want the title towards the bottom. So I wonder if I just pull out the title here. All right, let me try something. So I actually do want CSS that only controls the title. So I'm going to pull it off of here and just add the transition to the title, since we're going to be adding title specific CSS anyway. So for the title, I'm going to give it a position of absolute. And that pulls it out of the document flow. So now the height of the title text is no longer calculated as the part of the total height of the section, which is fine. But now I have the ability to position it anywhere in the section, which is exactly what I want. So if I give it a bottom of 30%, it'll be 30% up from the bottom of the section, and then I can give it a text align of center. Let's see. Okay, that does not position it centered. Let me go to the content title. Because I need to give it a width of 100%. And let's see. So I'm adding the padding here. Let's see if adding a box sizing of borders box to this is going to fix box sizing border box. Oh no, that doesn't fix the issue. Okay. So I don't want to give this title a width of 100%, it looks like. Okay, so instead I'm just going to position it in the center. So I can get rid of these. So I'm going to say left. One way we can horizontally center it is by giving it a left of 50% and then a transform translate on the x-axis minus 50%, which moves it back 50% of its own width, and therefore centers it horizontally on the page. So there we go. We now get it fading out. Perfect. Okay. So this is totally responsive. Let me go ahead and turn off my custom CSS window thing. And now I can full screen. So this is totally responsive. This text will never get cut off because the height of these sections are determined by the tallest height of the content. So even as I kind of like shrink down my screen here, and as things start to get, pretty squishy, our text is always in view and it's totally responsive, which is just the best. And then eventually these should stack. I'm going to have to do my own media query to make sure that they don't ever do this. And now there you go. So there's still, the height is still determined by the height of the text. Now on mobile, since there's no hover state on mobile, what I'm going to have to do is just make it always appear so not have a hover state. So 2 things to do, make sure this never happens, and then kind of handle mobile. So let's go ahead and tackle those right now. So I need to figure out at what screen size it's doing that kind of funky thing, and then just make sure that it stacks before that. So if you have the Chrome Inspect tools open as you resize your browser, you get dimensions in the top right-hand corner, which is super nice. So I can see roughly at what size this is going to be breaking. So it looks like it's the normal breakpoint of 767 pixels. Yep, 767 is the breakpoint. So that's sort of a classic mobile breakpoint in 7.1. And so what I can do is for this user items list simple is what has the display of grid. So if I scroll up, so we have user items list simple, and then we have our grid template columns. So right now it's repeating 3 columns, each one fraction of the page. So on mobile, and oh, you can see that's happening at a min width of 768 pixels. So what we want to do is sort of the inverse of that. So at the bottom here, before our closing curly bracket, in the user items list simple, so before that closing curly bracket, let's see where that is. Oh, okay, I closed it right there. So I'm going to come inside the final curly bracket here inside of this section. I'm going to say at media, screen, and max width 767 pixels. So this is our mobile media query. And what we want to do is first we want to target the user items list simple and open up some curly brackets. And this is going to be grid, template, columns, and we only want 1 column. So I'm going to do 1 FR. So now on mobile, it just immediately stacks. It doesn't go to like the weird 2 and then 1. So that's working exactly how we want it to. And then the other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our list item title has we want to override all these styles. So we want it to be position relative. Let me go down to the mobile view. Position relative, opacity 1. Bottom, we'll do unset. Kind of reset all these styles here, unset. And transform of none. There we go. So that content's back at the top. And then we can get our description and our button. So I'll grab those. Under our title, I'll paste that in, and we don't need the transition. We just want to make the opacity 1. There we go. So this is our mobile view. And then we want to make sure that on hover, well, actually, we'll just make sure that the content title is included in here. Add a comma and make sure that it's always 1 on mobile, even on hover. So I'll add an important tag and now it won't fade out. Awesome. And then we definitely need much more padding here. So let me go to the list item content. And then for the padding, let's do maybe like 30 pixels. Let's do 30 pixels by 6 viewport width units. Maybe 50 pixels. So this is the padding on the top and the bottom. Maybe let's do 80 pixels. Just want to make sure they're spaced out enough so they feel like their own things. Maybe I'll go 90. Yeah, that seems better. Okay, sweet. So now if we go back to desktop, we have this cool hover effect and the buttons are clickable, and then it looks really good and scales really well down on mobile as well. All right, that was a good exercise in custom CSS. Let me go ahead. So I highlighted everything and hit Shift and then Tab, and that just sort of like organizes everything. It lines everything up if there was like improper spacing anywhere. And I hate when there's trailing curly brackets like that. It just makes it harder to read. So I'm going to clear some space in here, and that way it can be on the same line. And now everything is looking good. So finally, at the end, I'm just going to denote that this is the end of this chunk since it is a really long one. So I'm going to say end. And when I do the end, I don't include these lines. I just do it like that. And I'll add some dashes just to make it a little more obvious. There we go. All right. So one thing you might have noticed as I'm writing my custom CSS, I write my custom CSS in the order that the elements appear in the DOM. So I started with the section, which houses all of the contents. And then inside, I started with the user items list simple. So that's this element here, user items list simple. Then we have all of our list items. So that's what I wrote next in the CSS. So here we have all of our list items. Inside of that, first comes the list item media. Then comes I added in the before pseudo element inside of the list item media. So that's our overlay. Then we have the list item content. And then here we have list item media inner because that's inside of the list item media, which still comes before the list item content. And then inside of the content, we have the text wrapper and the button wrapper, and the title comes first and then the description. So I put the description first, then the button. I have the title and then the description because the title comes first. Then I have just the title text. We have just the button text, our button hover. And then here we have our kind of like, here's our hover styles. So I have our normal styles first, and then I have our hover styles. And again, all of this is written in the order that it appears in the DOM. And that just makes it easier to read from a CSS perspective, and also kind of just helps me for my just logic in like understanding the structure of the sections and how I write the CSS. If I ever need to go edit this in the future, I just sort of understand that there's a logical flow to how I'm writing my CSS. So I think that's really important. So this is, other than it's like a little bit hard to read because I like to do nesting. So for a CSS beginner, like it might be confusing that there's 3 different curly brackets here. But because, you know, this isn't for the client to ever edit, this is just my CSS. And nesting saves on repeating selectors. I like to nest my CSS. So it's pretty clean, it's pretty readable, and I would consider this, you know, well-written CSS, other than the fact that it might not be completely readable to, you know, novice CSS writers. But other than that, I would say this is pretty strong and a good way to do a responsive hover design like this. Okay, with that being said, let's go ahead and finish up our design. So now we just have the footer left. So I'm going to go ahead and add a section to our footer. So this one, it looks like, is not using a fluid engine section. So I'll go ahead and hit upgrade, and we'll change the color to dark 1. And I just kind of have to, let me just delete all this content in here. Actually, it'll be easier if I just start from scratch. So here we have home, about, give, stay, and blog. So let me do those first. So it looks like this is actually all part of the newsletter block. So let me go ahead and just add in a newsletter block. Okay, and I'll have to make that kind of, you know, much smaller. And then we have 3 buttons over here. And these are, I'm gonna leave them as fill buttons because they all need to be the same size. Okay, I've made these tertiary buttons so that I can make their font size smaller. And then finally, I'm gonna hide this banner so I can see the last section. And this just needs to be black. So I will edit the site footer, edit the section, and then go to darkest one. And then I'll just come in here and, you know, update the footer information. Hit save and exit. And there we go. So this is now feeling a little bit big. This is a heading 4, so I think I need to make heading 4s a lot smaller. Yeah, something like that. Okay, and now let's go ahead and finish up the mobile view. So the last thing I'm gonna do is come into the newsletter block, and I just wanna make sure that the button is white. Okay, so now we can, oh, I forgot, I have to edit the site header, and I need to change the layout. We're gonna do that. And I need to change out the logo. Like that. And then on the home page, so we'll do the home header page code injection. We'll just get rid of the whole header title. So I'll click the gear icon, go to advanced, add in my style tags, and then make sure that the logo gets a display of none. And I'm going to go ahead and add an important tag just to make sure. I don't want anything that Squarespace does to override this. I want to make sure it's hidden on the home page. Just like that. So now if I inspect, let's see. header nav should not have a margin. So I'm also going to give the header nav a margin top of 0. Also with an important tag. There we go. Now everything lines up. Perfect. But if we went to another page, then the header logo will still be visible. This page was not a great example, but there we go. Now you can see the header. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up kind of, you know, my quick build out of this design. I, of course, am gonna come inside, and after this video is done recording and kind of, you know, clean things up a little bit, maybe tweak font sizes here and there, but that's sort of the majority of my process and workflow. Get the fonts and colors set up, then start building, tweak fonts and colors, and then, you know, do any sort of like CSS customizations and then clean up mobile view. So there you go. We have now built out this mockup from start to finish inside of Squarespace. I hope you learned something from this video. If you did, then please consider subscribing to the channel for more Squarespace content like this, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.